What if a single act of kindness could change the course of your entire life? Megan Foster's hands trembled as she scrubbed the last of the coffee rings from the counter at Joe's Diner, the sponge disintegrating under her grip. The clock above the kitchen passed through red 10:18 p.m., its second hand ticking like a heartbeat she couldn't slow. At 24, Megan's life was a fragile scaffold. Her mother, Clara, battled chronic lung disease, tethered to an oxygen tank that wheezed day and night. Her younger brother, Ethan, 16 and fiercely bright, needed textbooks and clothes he'd outgrown but never complained about, and the rent for their cramped apartment loomed like a storm on the horizon. The diner's late shift paid just enough to keep them from sinking. But tonight, Megan felt like she was drowning in exhaustion. She glanced out the smudged window, her breath fogging the glass. The street was desolate, the occasional car's headlights slicing through the dark like knives. Then she saw it. A small shape huddled across the street, barely visible under the stuttering street lamp. A child? Out here in this freezing cold? Her heart lurched, and she dropped the sponge, soapy water pooling on the counter. "Lou!" she called to the cook, who was scraping grease off the grill, the sizzle filling the air. "I'm stepping out for a minute." "Better be quick, Meg," Lou grunted, not looking up. "We're closing soon." Megan grabbed her threadbare coat and a half-eaten turkey sandwich she'd saved for her own dinner, wrapping it in a napkin. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped into the biting air, her sneakers crunching on frost-dusted pavement. As she crossed the street, the shape took form, a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, curled into a ball. Her dark hair was matted, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. Her pale blue jacket, frayed and too thin, offered no protection, and her small body shook with cold. "Hey, sweetheart," Megan said, crouching to the girl's level, her voice soft to avoid startling her. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The girl's eyes, wide and glassy like a cornered animal's, flicked up to meet Megan's. She didn't speak, but her lip quivered and she hugged her knees tighter. Megan's chest tightened. She'd seen hardship. Her own life was proof. But this child's fear was raw, a wound that made Megan's struggles feel small. "You hungry?" Megan asked, holding out the sandwich. "It's turkey and cheddar. My favorite." The girl hesitated, her gaze darting between Megan and the sandwich. Then, with a trembling hand, she snatched it, tearing into it with a hunger that made Megan's throat burn. Crumbs fell onto her jacket as she ate, her small frame hunched protectively. How long had this kid been out here, starving? "I'm Megan," she said, forcing a gentle smile. "What's your name?" The girl swallowed, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Sophie," she whispered, her voice so faint Megan leaned closer to hear. "Sophie," Megan repeated, her smile widening. "That's a beautiful name. Where's your mom or dad? Sophie? Are they nearby?" Sophie's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mommy's gone," she choked out, her voice breaking. "I don't know where she is." Megan's stomach twisted. "Gone?" She scanned the street, hoping for a frantic parent. But it was empty, the wind howling like a warning. Something was wrong, deeply, terribly wrong. "Okay, Sophie," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the chill creeping up her spine. "How about you come with me for a bit? I've got a warm place you can sit, and we'll figure this out together." "Deal." Sophie hesitated, her eyes searching Megan's face for trust. Then she nodded, clutching the sandwich's remains like a lifeline. Megan offered her hand, and Sophie's icy fingers curled around hers, small but fierce. As they crossed back to the diner, Megan felt a chill that wasn't from the cold, a sense that she just stepped into a story she wasn't prepared to finish. Inside the diner, Megan settled Sophie into a vinyl booth by the window, draping her own coat over the girl's trembling shoulders. The neon sign buzzed, casting a pinkish glow across Sophie's face. Lou raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, sliding a plate of fries and a ketchup packet across the pass-through. Megan brought Sophie a glass of milk, watching as she ate with the same desperate hunger, her eyes flicking to window every few seconds, like she expected someone to burst through the glass. "Slow down, kiddo," Megan said, sliding into the booth opposite. "You'll get a tummy ache." Sophie obeyed, but her gaze stayed on the street, her hands clutching the fries like they might vanish. Megan studied her, noting the contradictions. Scuff of high-end sneakers, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with an ornate S. The way she sat with strange poise, like she'd been taught to carry herself but didn't know why. This wasn't a kid from the neighborhood. There was a story here, tangled and heavy. "Where do you live, Sophie?" Megan asked gently. "Do you know your address? A phone number?" Sophie shook her head, her fingers twisting the napkin into knots. "We move a lot," she mumbled. "Mommy said it was safer that way." Megan's brow furrowed. "Safer?" The word sent a prickle down her spine, like a warning she couldn't decipher. She wanted to press, but Sophie's eyelids drooped, exhaustion winning out. The girls had Bob, and Megan made a decision. She couldn't leave Sophie alone, not tonight. "Lou, I'm taking her to my place," she said, standing. "I'll call the cops from there." Lou grunted, wiping his hands on his apron, but his eyes softened. "Watch yourself, Meg. You don't know what kind of trouble this is." Megan nodded, helping Sophie into her coat, which hung loosely on her small frame. The walk to her apartment was short but tense, Sophie's hand gripping hers tightly, her eyes darting to every shadow. At home, Claire was asleep on the couch, her oxygen tank humming, the TV flickering with a muted infomercial. Ethan looked up from his math homework, his lanky frame hunched over the kitchen table, a pencil tucked behind his ear. "Who's this?" he asked, eyeing Sophie warily, his voice low to avoid waking Clara. "Her name's Sophie," Megan said quietly. "She's lost. I'm calling the police." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd grown up in a neighborhood where trouble was never far off. Without a word, he grabbed a blanket from the closet and draped it over Sophie, who curled up on the couch, clutching Megan's coat like a shield. Megan dialed 911, her voice steady as she explained. The dispatcher promised officers would arrive soon, but the wait stretched on. To keep Sophie calm, Megan sat beside her, spinning stories from her childhood. How she and Ethan once tried to rescue a stray cat that turned out to be a raccoon, or the time they built a snow fort that collapsed mid-snowball fight. Sophie listened, her eyes wide, a faint smile breaking through her fear. She even giggled when Megan mimicked Ethan's indignant shout as the fort caved in. For a moment, she was just a kid, not a puzzle with missing pieces. When the police arrived, their questions were gentle but pointed. Sophie repeated her story. Her mother was gone. She didn't know her address, and her last name was just Sophie. The officers exchanged glances, their faces grim. Officer Reyes, a woman with kind eyes and a notepad, pulled Megan aside. "No missing child reports match her," Reyes said, her voice low. "And what she said about her mom, it's worrying. We're checking, but this might not be a simple runaway case. You did good, taking her in, but this could get messy." Megan's chest tightened. "Messy how?" She glanced at Sophie, who was doodling on a scrap of paper Ethan had given her, her hand trembling as she drew a lopsided house with a stick-figure woman beside it. Whatever this was, Megan wasn't backing out now. The next morning, Megan woke to find Sophie still asleep, her face peaceful for the first time, the blanket tucked under her chin. Clara, propped up with pillows, watched the girl with a tender smile, her breathing labored but her eyes bright. "She's been through hell," Clara rasped, her voice weak but certain. "You're doing right by her, Meg. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Megan nodded, but worry gnawed at her like a splinter. She called the diner to take the day off, ignoring Lou's complaints about short staffing. Around noon, Reyes called with an update. No leads on Sophie's mother, but potential match had surfaced in a missing persons database. The name Sophie Grayson was linked to a high-profile case from 8 months ago, but details were scarce. Someone was coming to the station to verify. Megan took Sophie to the police station, holding her hand to the crowded lobby, the air thick with burnt coffee and printer ink. Sophie clung to her, her eyes darting nervously, her small body tense. When a man in a tailored suit entered, the room seemed to hold its breath. He was tall, with dark hair streaked with gray, his face etched with exhaustion and raw grief. His eyes locked on Sophie, and he froze, his breath catching. "Sophie," he whispered, his voice cracking like glass. Sophie's grip on Megan's hand tightened, and she shrank back, her sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. The man dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face, his hands reaching out but stopping short, as if afraid she'd vanish. "It's me, sweetheart. It's Daddy." Megan's heart pounded. "Daddy?" She looked at Reyes, who nodded slightly. "Daniel Grayson." Reyes murmured, leaning close. "Tech billionaire. His wife, Elena, died in a car accident 8 months ago, and Sophie vanished that night. He's been searching for her ever since." Megan's mind reeled. A billionaire? She glanced at Sophie, who trembled, her eyes fixed on Daniel. But she didn't move toward him, didn't smile, just stood there, frozen. Megan knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. "It's okay, Sophie," she said softly, her voice steady despite the chaos in her head. "He's your dad. He's here for you." Sophie's eyes brimmed with tears, but she nodded, letting Megan guide her to Daniel. He enveloped her in a hug, sobbing into her hair, his shoulders shaking. Megan stepped back, her throat tight with relief and unease. She'd done her part. Sophie was safe. So, why did it feel like something was still unresolved? As Daniel thanked Megan, his voice thick with gratitude, promising to stay in touch, she noticed a woman near the station's entrance. Older, impeccably dressed in a charcoal coat, with sharp eyes that seemed to dissect everyone. She approached Daniel, her heels clicking, her tone clipped. "Daniel, we need to leave," she said, her voice low but firm. "This needs to be handled discreetly." Daniel's jaw clenched, his arms still around Sophie. "Miriam, not now," he said, his voice tight with anger. Megan's ears pricked up. "Miriam?" She remembered Sophie's whisper last night, during one of her stories, about Aunt Miriam being mean to her mother, her voice trembling with fear. Her stomach twisted, a cold knot forming. She pulled Reyes aside, her voice urgent. "Check into Sophie's aunt," she said, glancing at Miriam, who was now speaking to an officer with a practiced smile. Sophie mentioned her last night, and she was scared. Reyes frowned, her pen pausing, but she nodded. "I'll look into it. Stay sharp, Megan." Megan left the station with a heaviness she couldn't shake. Sophie's tearful wave from Daniel's arms burning into her memory. She told herself it was over. She'd done what she could. But as she walked home, the wind seemed to whisper that this was only the beginning. Days later, Megan's life slipped back into its grueling rhythm. Long shifts at the diner, Clara's coughing fits, Ethan's late-night study sessions. But Sophie lingered in her thoughts. The way she clung to her, the fear in her eyes, the unanswered questions about her mother. Then, one evening, as Megan wiped down tables, Reyes called with news that turned her world upside down. "We dug into Miriam," Reyes said, her voice low and urgent. "She's Daniel Grayson's sister-in-law, Elena's older sister. And Megan, it's bad. Miriam orchestrated Sophie's disappearance after the accident that killed Elena. She claimed it was to protect Sophie from Daniel's grief, but that's a lie. Elena had suspected Miriam of embezzling from Daniel's company, millions siphoned off over years. Elena confronted her, threatened to go to the authorities. The accident wasn't an accident. It was staged, and Sophie wasn't supposed to survive. Megan's knees buckled, and she gripped the counter, the phone shaking in her hand. "What?" she whispered, her mind racing. "Sophie, where was she all this time?" Reyes hesitated, her voice grim. Miriam kept her hidden in a series of remote cabins, moving her every few weeks to avoid detection. Sophie's memories of moving a lot and safer that way were from that. The bracelet she's wearing, it's from Elena, the only thing Sophie kept. Miriam's plan fell apart when Sophie escaped during a stop in the city. That's how she ended up on that sidewalk where you found her. Megan's blood ran cold. Sophie had been a prisoner, a pawn in a scheme so cruel it was unthinkable. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Miriam's in custody," Reyes said, "but she's out on bail pending trial. Daniel's a wreck. He trusted Miriam, leaned on her after Elena's death. He had no idea. Sophie's safe with him now, but she's traumatized. Keeps asking for you." Megan's heart twisted. She hung up, her hands shaking as she untied her apron. She couldn't stay away, not after this. The next day, she visited the Grayson estate, a sprawling mansion on a hill, its stone walls and manicured gardens a world apart from her own. Daniel met her at the door, his face haggard but his eyes warm with gratitude. "Megan," he said, his voice rough, "I don't know how to thank you. Sophie, she's been through hell, but she lights up when we talk about you." Sophie ran to her, throwing her arms around Megan's waist, her small body trembling. "You came back," she whispered, her voice muffled against Megan's sweater. Megan knelt, hugging her tightly. "Of course I did, kiddo. I'm right here." Over the next weeks, Megan became a regular at the estate, bringing homemade cookies, board games, and stories to coax smiles from Sophie. The girl's nightmares were frequent, her screams waking the household, but Megan's presence anchored her. Daniel began to open up, sharing fragments of his life. His small-town childhood, his love for Elena, the crushing weight of his wealth after building a tech empire. Megan shared her struggles, Clara's worsening health, Ethan's dreams of college, her fear of never breaking free from a grind. Their conversations, often late at night over coffee in the estate's quiet kitchen, built a bridge between their worlds. But Miriam's shadow loomed. Released on bail, she launched a vicious campaign to discredit Megan, spreading rumors through tabloids that Megan had known Sophie's identity and planned to exploit Daniel's wealth. The gossip reached the diner, where Lou warned Megan to watch her back. "Rich folks play dirty," he said, tossing a rag over his shoulder. "You're in their world now." The rumors stung. Customers whispered behind their menus. And Ethan came home one day with a bruise on his cheek, saying kids at school had called Megan a gold digger. Her resolve wavered, but Sophie's trust and Daniel's quiet support kept her grounded. Meanwhile, a new subplot emerged. Ethan, digging online out of curiosity, found old articles about Daniel's company, hinting at a disgruntled former partner, Victor Crane, who'd been fired years ago after a falling out with Elena. Ethan showed Megan a blurry photo of Crane, a gaunt man with intense eyes, and a cryptic comment he'd posted recently. "Justice comes for those who steal what's mine." Megan's unease grew. Could Crane be connected to Miriam's schemes? She shared her concerns with Reyes, who confirmed Crane was a person of interest. "He vanished after Elena's death," Reyes said. "We're looking for him, but he's slippery. Stay vigilant." One evening, as Megan helped Sophie draw a butterfly, Daniel received a call. His face paled, and he hung up abruptly. "Miriam's gone," he said, his voice tight. "She skipped bail. The police think she's coming for Sophie." Megan's blood ran cold. Daniel hired security, but the state felt like a fortress under siege. That night, Megan stayed, sleeping in a guest room near Sophie's. At 2:37 a.m., a crash downstairs jolted her awake. Heart pounding, she crept to Sophie's room, finding the girl asleep unharmed. Downstairs, Daniel grappled with a figure in a dark coat, Miriam wild-eyed, clutching a knife, her face twisted with desperation. Megan grabbed a heavy vase and swung, catching Miriam's shoulder. She crumpled, and Daniel pinned her until the police arrived, their sirens piercing the night. Miriam's arrest was final, her schemes exposed, but the ordeal left Sophie shaken, her nightmares worse than ever. Daniel, racked with guilt for trusting Miriam, leaned on Megan, his gratitude deepening into something unspoken. But the threat wasn't over. A week later, a letter arrived at the estate, anonymous and chilling. "You took her from me. I'll take her back." Daniel dismissed it as a prank, but Megan's instinct screamed otherwise. She showed it to Reyes, who traced it to Victor Crane, Miriam's former accomplice. Crane, it turned out, had been more than a business partner. He'd been obsessed with Elena, believing she'd loved him before choosing Daniel. After Elena's death, he'd allied with Miriam, helping hide Sophie, but his fixation shifted to the girl, seeing her as a way to reclaim Elena's legacy. When Miriam's plan unraveled, Crane went rogue, driven by a delusional need to save Sophie. One afternoon, while Megan and Sophie played in the garden, a van screeched to a stop at the gate. Crane, gone and wild-eyed, leapt out, shouting Sophie's name. Security tackled him, but not before he fired a shot, the bullet grazing Megan's arm. Sophie screamed, and Daniel rushed out, pulling them to safety. Crane was arrested, his ramblings about my daughter chilling everyone. The incident shattered Sophie's fragile progress, and she refused to leave Megan's side. Daniel, shaken by how close he'd come to losing them, confessed his feelings. "I can't do this without you, Megan," he said, his voice raw. "Not just for Sophie. For me." Megan, her arm bandaged, admitted she felt the same, her fears of their different worlds fading. She'd seen Daniel's heart. Not his wealth, but his love for Sophie, his vulnerability, his trust in her. Just when they thought the danger was past, a new revelation surfaced. During Crane's interrogation, he dropped a bombshell. Miriam hadn't acted alone in Elena's murder. A corrupt police detective, Officer Holt, had helped stage the accident, paid off by Miriam to cover her tracks. Holt, now retired, had been living quietly in the city, but Crane's confession put him back on the radar. Reyes warned Megan and Daniel that Holt might come after Sophie to silence any loose ends. The news sent Daniel into a tailspin. He'd trusted the police, believed Elena's death was a tragic accident. Now, every shadow felt like a threat. Megan, determined to protect Sophie, suggested they leave the estate temporarily, hiding out at a safe house Daniel owned upstate. Reluctantly, he agreed, and the three of them, plus a small security team, relocated to a secluded cabin in the woods. The safe house was a stark contrast to the estate. Cozy but sparse, with creaky floors and a wood-burning stove. Sophie, initially anxious, warmed to it, especially when Megan taught her to make esmores over the fire. For a few days, it felt like they could breathe. Daniel and Megan grew closer, sharing quiet moments while Sophie's laughter filled the cabin. But Holt was closer than they thought. One night, as a storm raged outside, the cabin's power cut out. Megan's heart raced as she checked on Sophie, finding her asleep. Daniel grabbed a flashlight, but before they could call security, a figure loomed at the window. Holt, his face twisted with desperation. He broke in, wielding a gun, demanding Sophie. Daniel tackled him, the gun skidding across the floor. Megan grabbed it, her hand shaking, and pointed at Holt, her voice steady despite her fear. "Back off," she said, her eyes locked on his. "You're not touching her." Security burst in, subduing Holt, but the confrontation left everyone rattled. Sophie, woken by the noise, clung to Megan, sobbing. Daniel, bruised but alive, held them both, his gratitude for Megan's courage unspoken but clear. With Holt and Crane in custody and Miriam's trial looming, the threats finally receded. Over the next 3 years, Megan wove herself into the Grayson family. She helped Sophie heal, teaching her to braid her hair, baking cookies, and reading stories that chased away her fears. They planted a garden together. Sophie's roses after her mother, her small hands steady in the soil. Therapy helped, and Sophie's laughter returned, bright and unguarded. She started calling Megan Meg, a nickname that felt like a hug. Daniel stepped back from his company, focusing on Sophie and Megan, his grief for Elena softening into memory. He and Megan grew closer, their bond forged in quiet moments. Shared glances over Sophie's laughter, late-night talks by the fire, walks in the garden where Daniel admitted his fear of losing them again. Megan shared her own fears, Clara's declining health, Ethan's future, her dream of a life beyond survival. Daniel listened, his presence a steady anchor. Clara's condition worsened, and Daniel quietly covered her medical bills, ensuring her final months were comfortable. He funded Ethan's college, despite Megan's protests. "You saved my family," Daniel said, his eyes fierce. "Let me help yours." Miriam's trial ended with a life sentence, and Holt and Crane were convicted, their shadows gone. Sophie testified against Miriam, her voice small but unwavering, Megan's hand in hers. The closure let Sophie bloom, her nightmares replaced by dreams of butterflies and stars. One spring evening, Daniel led Megan to the garden, where Sophie had strung fairy lights in the trees, giggling as she hid behind a rose bush. Daniel took Megan's hand, his eyes shining. "Megan," he said, his voice thick, "you brought us back to life. I love you, not just for what you did, but for who you are. Marry me." He knelt, holding a sapphire ring, Sophie's birthstone. Tears blurred Megan's vision as she whispered, "Yes." Sophie rushed out, throwing her arms around them, her laughter melody. Their wedding was intimate, held in the garden under a golden sunset. Sophie, in a flower crown, carried the rings, her smile radiant. Clara, frail but joyful, watched from a cushioned chair, Ethan at her side, his eyes bright with pride. The vows were raw, a promise to love through pain and joy. As Daniel kissed Megan, Sophie tugged her dress, whispering, "You're my mom now, right?" Megan knelt, tears falling, and hugged her. "Always, kiddo." 10 years later, Megan stood in the garden, watching Sophie, now 16, teach her younger brother, Eli, to catch fireflies. Daniel wrapped an arm around her, their newborn daughter, Clara, asleep against his chest. Clara Sr. had passed peacefully, her final days filled with family. Ethan thrived as an engineer, his projects changing lives. Megan thought back to that cold night, the sandwich she'd shared, the little girl who'd changed everything. Her kindness had rippled outward, creating a family bound by love, not blood. Her struggles hadn't vanished, but they no longer defined her. She was home, her heart full, the quiet power of a single act shaping a life she'd never dared to dream. As Sophie ran to her, holding a glowing jar of fireflies, Megan smiled, her eyes meeting Daniel's. "Thank you," she whispered, not to him, but to the night that brought them together. A night that proved even the smallest act could mend a broken world. What would you risk to protect someone you love, knowing it might cost you everything? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart.